Some things have the power to live on forever, often referred to as being classic or vintage. Their memory stays in our minds. The sounds and colors hold deep within our hearts. The shape resonates with those specific special years. The very essence of them brings forth emotions we thought were long gone. They bleed originality, and yet they wax old and become brittle with age, outdated in their presentation, in need of revision. But sometimes those things are given new life, a new breath to revitalize their soul. Like the dawn, long shadows are cast by new light. This is the case for the Super NES Classic Edition. By the end of 2016, Nintendo was at an awkward spot. Their current home console, the Wii U, was at the end of its life. This would be the last holiday season it would be available on store shelves. Nintendo saw the writing on the wall and knew that the Wii U wouldn't be a big seller as it hadn't ever really taken off. People didn't gravitate to it like they had with their previous console. It can be attributed to a few things, but it really came down to was misunderstanding. People weren't going to spend $300 on a console they didn't understand. It didn't help that the previous year they had announced that a new console was just on the horizon. The NX was on the cusp of being unveiled, though it wasn't quite ready. So what was Nintendo to do? Just ride out the holiday season as a footnote? Or could they somehow find a way to muscle their way back into the minds of the masses? But how? Oh, they knew how, and they pulled it off in spectacular fashion. The one thing Nintendo has that no other gaming company possesses is a legacy. They have been around since the mid-80s as a living room staple. Even if you didn't have one of their home consoles, you probably knew someone who did. Along with the staying power, they have also created some of the greatest games of all time. The characters are some of the most beloved and recognizable ever created. Characters such as Mario, Luigi, Yoshi, Princess Peach, Bowser, Donkey Kong, Link and Zelda are on the forefronts of people's minds. When your grandma in the 90s starts talking about Mario, you know you've got an iconic character. That's not even counting others that are also iconic like Chain Chomps, Shy Guys, the Triforce, and Master Sword. They are all very recognizable elements to those respective games that people recognize. With all this history, Nintendo decided to use it in their favor. It was announced the summer before it released that they would be releasing a tiny playable replica of one of their most iconic consoles. The NES Classic Edition was to be released in November of 2016, in extremely limited quantities. If you weren't at the front of the line, it was likely you didn't get it. You would have thought that this little novelty box would have been widely available because of its mass appeal, but you would have been wrong. Nintendo dominated the headlines that holiday season due to the lack of stock. Third-party websites had listings for units priced way over their suggested $60. Nintendo had catapulted their way to the forefront with this mini console. It was something all gamers wanted. It displayed games in HD and colors that were very close to the original games. Nintendo brought it with the game lineup as well. The expected first-party titles are there, like all 3 Super Mario games, The Legend of Zelda and its sequel, The Adventure of Link, Metroid, and Punch-Out! But they also brought it with the third-party games such as Castlevania, Mega Man 2, Super C, Ninja Gaiden, and Ghosts 'n Goblins. Keep in mind that if you bought all these game cartridges, it would be extremely expensive, so $60 was an absolute deal, even if the games were emulated. But what pushed this little console over the top was the inclusion of an exact replica of the original NES controller. Playing these retro games with the controller they were intended to be played with is nothing short of perfection. People went crazy trying to get their hands on them. When stores restocked them, they sold out almost instantly. Nintendo produced the NES Classic through April of 2017, when they announced that it would be discontinued, which baffled everybody because it was still in high demand. Why would anybody not want to make more money on something they were already producing? A few months later, Nintendo announced that the Super NES Classic would be available at the end of the upcoming September. It was highly speculated that there would be a mini version of the Super Nintendo, so it wasn't a huge surprise. With the scarcity of the NES Classic Edition, people, including me, were skeptical that they would be able to get their hands on the little nostalgia machine. This led to people checking the big gaming retailers daily to make sure that they could get a pre-order in. That was the best way to secure your chance at owning one. Even though Reggie said that there would be more stock this time around, those words didn't ease the fear of missing it. Pre-orders went live at GameStop on August 22nd. but only in their brick and mortar stores. They weren't going to be doing the pre-orders online. I raced down to GameStop and secured my pre-order. It felt like a long wait for the Super NES Classic to be released. It finally was released on the 29th of September. When I picked up my order, it seemed like the same story was occurring with the NES Classic. There was a gigantic line waiting outside the store. Luckily, I was able to get my unit in a separate line. I cracked open the box and admired the beauty in the miniature console. Nintendo went all out for this one, even including a faux front that mimics the controller ports. It adds that tiny detail that really didn't need to be there, but pushes it over the top for authenticity. The game selection was almost perfect, but I was happy with what it included. Arguably, the most legendary games to ever exist were put on this system. Like its predecessor, the expected Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country, and Super Metroid were included. But Nintendo brought the heat again with the third-party games. Games like Castlevania 4, Contra 3, Mega Man X, Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy 3 or 6, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and Earthbound. These games are all-time classics, and I'm glad that they were given new life on a console that can output the image in HD. But there were also a few more surprises I wasn't expecting to see. Super Mario RPG, which I never had a chance to play, and the two games that used a Super FX chip, Star Fox and Yoshi's Island. The latter two games weren't even available outside their original releases. They never graced the Virtual Console on the Wii, Wii U, or 3DS. But the biggest surprise game was the inclusion of the unreleased but finished game from the 90s, Star Fox 2. A first-party Nintendo game that never got to see the light of day was finally going to have an official release. That alone was almost worth the price. But there are a few odd omissions. Chrono Trigger is probably the most glaring. This game is a must-play for Super Nintendo fans. It's always ranked as one of the best games for the system. The game I was hoping to see included was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. By far my favorite beat-em-up. This game hooked me in the arcade and blew me away on the Super Nintendo. I couldn't believe I could play it at home whenever I wanted. It was probably difficult to get the license to put it on the Super NES Classic, but I would have been very happy to see it there. The missing games that make the least amount of sense are the first-party games. Where are the Super Mario All-Star games? Everybody I knew who owned a Super Nintendo had this game. And wasn't the purpose of the SNES Classic to evoke nostalgia? I think it would have been a great addition if it were there. Why was only the first Donkey Kong Country included? Don't get me wrong, contrary to the vast majority of gamers, I think the first game is the best. I've played it to death and will continue to play it until I can no longer hold a controller. But that doesn't mean that the second and third game are bad. In fact, I love Donkey Kong Country 2, and I'm in the process of playing DKC 3. Most DKC fans think the second game is the best out of the three, even calling it the best platformer ever made. So why wouldn't that game be included on the system? Nintendo owns those games, so it baffles me that it wasn't there. However, the included game selection was great. The addition of a few more games would have made it even better. But it did include something else. Nintendo packaged the system with 2 official Super Nintendo controllers, which makes the game playing experience so much better. All the included games were developed with this controller in mind. Playing them with it is the correct and best possible way to experience them. The controller is a huge part of the gameplay, and this time they included 2, unlike the NES Classic Edition that only had 1. You could buy NES controllers separately, but they were even harder to find than the NES Classic. This time that wasn't even an option, everybody got 2. But they also added even more value because you could use these on the Wii and Wii U Virtual Consoles, so you could also play other titles you already downloaded. That's a very valuable addition in my eyes. The whole package was priced at $80. That's $20 more than the NES Classic Edition. It had less games, but the games it did have were amazing. Just like the NES Classic, if you were to go shell out all the cash for the original cartridges, it would cost significantly more than this little box. The image quality is top notch. It displays the games in 720p, which looks great on a modern TV. Even the box was designed with the highest standards to evoke those inner longing emotions. You really couldn't have asked for much more from Nintendo on this one. It was affordable and easier to get. Over time, I would often see them on store shelves waiting for a passerby to pick it up. The SNES Classic is by far the best classic console that's been released, in my personal opinion. I know there are plenty of Sega fans that would argue, but for me, it's just as perfect as it can be. The 16-bit era is one of the most cherished times in gaming for me, so having something like this that has been given so much care really means a lot to people like me. If you would have told me that I would be able to buy a brand new Super Nintendo in 2018, I'd have thought you were seriously crazy. Nintendo hasn't ever done anything like that, and I didn't think I'd ever see the day it happened. Some things have the power to live on forever. They become classics that cement themselves in the minds of those who experienced them. The very essence of them brings forth emotions we thought were long gone. As time goes by, they wax old and become brittle with age, outdated in their presentation, in need of revision. But sometimes those things are given new life, a new breath to revitalize their soul. Like the dawn, long shadows are cast by new light. This is the case for the Super NES Classic Edition.